The sun blazed over the desolate plains of Black Mesa, its merciless heat turning the cracked earth into a shimmering oven, the horizon wavering like a mirage. Sarah Lynn, a wiry 25-year-old with fire in her veins, staggered through the scrub, her bare feet shredded by thorns and stones, each step a jolt of agony that coursed through her battered body. Her blouse, once a sturdy brown cotton from her brother's old wardrobe, hung in tatters, soaked with sweat and blood that streaked her arms and face. The air was thick with the scent of dry sage and the metallic tang of her wounds. A deep gash on her thigh from a knife, bruises blooming purple across her ribs where boots had struck. Hours ago, a gang of ruthless outlaws had descended on her brother's ranch, their eyes gleaming with greed for the oil they believed lay beneath the land. When Sarah refused to sign it over, they turned vicious, beating her with fists and rifle butts, tearing at her clothes as their laughter rang out like a death knell. She had fought back with all she had, her nails raking across one man's cheek, drawing blood, her elbow slamming into another's jaw, a scream tearing from her throat that echoed across the mesa. But they were too many, their strength overwhelming. The leader, a gaunt man with a jagged scar over his eye, had pinned her down, his knife flashing as he sliced her thigh, growling, "Sign, or we take more than the land." Left for dead in the dust, her body broken and her spirit teetering, Sarah had crawled away, driven by a stubborn will she inherited from her brother, killed defending this very ground. The outlaw's shouts faded, but the shame and pain clung to her, her breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. The landscape stretched endlessly around her, a sea of sand and scrub under a sky that offered no mercy. Her vision blurred with tears and exhaustion, the blood from her thigh leaving a dark trail in the dirt, marking her desperate flight. She clutched the torn fabric to her chest, her other hand pressing against the wound, the throbbing a constant pulse of torment. In the distance, a faint silhouette emerged, a ranch, its weathered barn and cabin a beacon in the wasteland. Her legs buckled, and she fell to her knees, the dry grass scraping her palms. "Stop! I'll take it off," she whispered, her voice a broken plea, a desperate offer born of survival, ready to trade her dignity for safety if it meant escaping further harm. The sound of hooves thundered through the stillness, growing louder, and Sarah's heart leapt into her throat. Had the outlaws tracked her? She shrank behind a scraggly cactus, peering through the spines, her body trembling with dread. But it wasn't them. It was a lone rider on a chestnut mare, his broad shoulders hunched with the weight of years. Thomas Gray, 52, a rancher who had withdrawn from the world after losing his son to a bandit raid, reined in his horse, the creak of leather breaking the silence. His face was weathered, etched with lines of grief and sun, his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much sorrow. He dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud, and spotted her, a broken figure in the dust, bloodied and shaking. Sarah rose unsteadily, her legs threatening to collapse, her hands clutching the rags tighter. "Please, don't hurt me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Thomas froze, his hand hovering near his holster, the sight of her vulnerability striking him like a blow. Memories of his son, beaten and left to die, flashed before him, tightening his chest. "Stop! I'll take it off," she added, her head bowed, her words a surrender to save herself. Thomas's jaw clenched, his mind reeling. He wasn't that kind of man. No, he had once been a protector, before loss turned him into a hermit. "Hold up," he said, his voice rough but gentle, stepping closer. "Ain't no need for that. Let's get you inside." He offered his arm, and Sarah, wary but out of options, took it, her weight leaning into him as they moved toward the ranch. The cabin door groaned open, revealing a sparse interior, wooden table, a cold stove, a rifle mounted above the door. Thomas guided her to a chair, his movements slow, deliberate, the air inside carrying the faint smell of hay and old leather. He fetched a tattered blanket, draping it over her shoulders, his hands steadying as she shivered. "What happened?" he asked, his tone low, guarded. Sarah's story poured out, her brother's land, the outlaw's greed, her fight, her voice breaking with each word. Thomas listened, his face hardening, the past and present colliding in his mind. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the threat of more trouble. He knew this peace wouldn't last. If you've made it this far into the tale, take a sip of your tea or coffee, lean back, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next, because this desert night is just beginning, and it helps keep these Wild West stories alive. The cabin door groaned shut behind Thomas, the sound a faint protest against the stillness as he guided Sarah to a weathered chair by the unlit stove. The room was cloaked in dimness, the only light seeping from a cracked lantern on the table, its weak glow casting long, wavering shadows across the rough-hewn walls. The air inside was thick with the musty scent of old leather and the faint tang of rust, a stark contrast to the brutality Sarah had escaped. She sank into the chair, her body trembling from exhaustion, the tattered blanket slipping to reveal the blood-streaked gash on her thigh. Her breaths came in shallow, uneven gasps, each one a reminder of the beating that had left her ribs bruised and her spirit fraying. Thomas stood a few paces away, his broad frame tense, his weathered face etched with lines of concern and a buried ache he hadn't confronted in years. He moved to the stove, striking a match with a sharp snap, the flame flaring briefly before settling into a steady burn as he coaxed the kindling to life. The crackle of wood broke the silence, a small comfort in the cold night. "You're safe here, for now," he said, his voice rough like sandpaper, the drawl of a man who had spoken more to the wind than to people. He fetched a dented tin cup and poured water from a jug, handing it to her with hands that shook slightly, hands that had once held a plow steady, but now trembled with the weight of memory. Sarah took it, her fingers brushing his, and drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, mixing with the dust and blood. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment before dropping to the floor. Thomas turned away, busying himself with gathering supplies, a worn cloth, a bottle of whiskey from a shelf cluttered with tools and jars of preserved peaches. The cabin was a testament to a life stripped to essentials, a table scarred with knife cuts, a single cot in the corner, a rifle hanging above the door like a guardian. Each item whispered of a past he had tried to forget. 15 years ago, outlaws had raided his homestead, killing his son, Jacob, in a senseless shootout while Thomas was away trading. He had found the boy's body, blood pooling in the dirt, and the guilt had hollowed him out, driving him into isolation. Now, Sarah sat in his home, her pain echoing his loss, stirring a compassion he thought long dead. "Tell me what happened," he said, kneeling beside her, the whiskey bottle in hand. Sarah hesitated, her fingers tightening on the blanket. Then the words spilled out, halting at first, then rushing like a river breaking its banks. "They came from my brother's land, said there's oil under it. I wouldn't sign, so they beat me, tore at me." Her voice cracked, and she pulled the blanket tighter. "Stop, I'll take it off," she murmured, her head bowing, the offer slipping out, a desperate bid for mercy she had learned from their threats. Thomas froze, his breath catching, the bottle slipping slightly in his grip. The image of Jacob, beaten and abandoned, flashed before him, and for a moment he was lost in that old grief. But then he shook his head, his jaw tightening. "No," he said firmly, his voice steadying. "Ain't no one gonna treat you like that here. Not while I'm breathing." He dipped the cloth in whiskey, the sharp scent cutting through the room, and gently pressed it to her thigh. Sarah winced, a soft cry escaping her lips, her body tensing. "Easy. It hurts," she whispered. Thomas nodded, his touch careful. "I know. I'm almost done. Just cleaning it." The wound was deep, the skin red and inflamed, but he worked methodically, wrapping it with a strip of fabric torn from an old shirt. Her trust in him grew with each gentle movement, a fragile thread in the darkness. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters, a harbinger of the danger that might follow. Thomas stood, checking the rifle above the door, his mind racing. The outlaws wouldn't stop. They'd track her blood, her trail. He glanced at Sarah, now leaning back, her eyes half closed, exhaustion claiming her. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." She nodded weakly, the blanket pulled close, her breathing slowing. Thomas sat by the window, the lantern light flickering, his hand resting on the rifle. The night held its breath, and with it, the promise of a fight he couldn't avoid. The past had found him again, but this time, he wouldn't turn away. If this tale's got you hooked, take a sip of your coffee or tea, lean back, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next, because the shadows are closing in, and it helps keep these Wild West stories alive. The fire crackled faintly in the hearth, its dying embers casting a weak, flickering glow across the cabin walls, the only light piercing the thick darkness of the night. Thomas sat by the window, his rifle balanced across his knees, the cold steel a grounding weight against his calloused hands. The wind outside moaned through the cracks, rattling the shutters with an ominous rhythm, carrying the faint scent of dust and the promise of danger. Sarah lay on the bench, her breathing shallow and uneven, the blanket pulled tight around her as the fever tightened its grip. The bandage on her thigh was stained with fresh blood and pus, the wound festering despite his care, the air heavy with the sour stench of infection. He had done his best, cleaned it with whiskey, wrapped it with a steady hand, but the frontier offered no mercy, and her strength was slipping away. His mind wandered, dragged back to a night he had buried deep. 15 years ago, outlaws had stormed his ranch under a moonless sky, their guns roaring like thunder. He had been in town, bartering for seed, leaving Jacob, his only son, to tend the livestock. When he returned, the barn was ablaze, the air thick with smoke and the coppery reek of blood. Jacob lay lifeless near the corral, his body battered, his eyes staring blankly at the stars. The guilt had eaten at Thomas ever since, a relentless fire that turned him into a recluse, vowing never to let another soul depend on him. Now, Sarah's presence, her pain, her resilience, had breached those walls, stirring ghosts he thought he'd silenced. Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open, clouded with fever. "Water," she rasped, her voice a fragile thread. Thomas rose, his joints protesting, and poured from the jug, holding the cup to her lips. She drank slowly, water dribbling down her chin, mingling with sweat and blood, her trembling hand brushing his. "Thank you," she murmured, her gaze locking with his for a moment, a flicker of gratitude cutting through the haze. "They'll come back, for the oil. My brother hid it, but they won't stop." Thomas's jaw clenched, his fists tightening. He knew those men, greedy, merciless, the same breed that had taken his son. "They won't lay a hand on you," he said, his voice low, a vow etched in steel. He stood, pacing the small room, boots thudding on the worn floorboards. The cabin was a stark refuge, a table scarred with use, shelves stocked with canned goods, the rifle a silent guardian. Outside, the wind carried a new sound, distant hoofbeats growing louder with each passing second. Thomas peered through the window, his breath fogging the glass. Shadows loomed on the horizon, 3 riders cutting through the night, their figures menacing against the starless sky. "They're comin'," he muttered, grabbing the rifle, the metallic click of the chamber echoing in the stillness. Sarah struggled to rise, her face paling. "I can help. I know the land," she said, her voice weak but resolute. Thomas shook his head. "Stay put. This is my burden now." As the riders drew closer, their voices pierced the wind. Harsh laughter, threats about the oil. The leader, a gaunt man with a scar over his eye, dismounted first, his boots crunching the dirt. "We know she's in there, Gray," he shouted, his voice dripping with menace. "Hand her over or we'll torch this dump." His companions flanked him, guns gleaming in the faint light, their shadows stretching long and threatening. Thomas's grip on the rifle tightened, the past and present colliding. The image of Jacob's broken body fueled his resolve, but Sarah's trust steadied him. He glanced at her, her eyes wide with fear yet burning with defiance. "Hold on," he said softly. "I'll deal with this." She nodded, clutching the blanket, her pain a silent plea. Thomas moved to the door, the weight of his choice settling on his shoulders. The fight was imminent, offering a chance to reclaim his honor, or lose it all once more. "So, tell me something, partner. If you were Thomas, would you face those riders or send Sarah out to save yourself? Take a sip of your coffee, or maybe that evening tea. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you don't want to miss what happens next, you might want to hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started." The night pressed against the cabin like a suffocating blanket, the wind howling through the gaps, carrying the thud of hooves and the guttural shouts of the approaching riders. Thomas stood at the door, his rifle gripped tight, the stock pressing into his palm, his breath steady despite the storm raging outside. The lantern inside flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows across the room, illuminating Sarah's pale face as she struggled to prop herself up on the bench. Her fever had spiked, sweat beading on her brow, the bandage on her thigh soaked with blood and pus, the infection a silent threat. "Stay down," Thomas barked, his voice rough with urgency, glancing back at her. Her eyes, wide with a mix of fear and resolve, locked onto his. "I can't just hide," she whispered, her hand reaching for the pistol he had left within reach. "They'll kill you if I don't fight." Thomas shook his head, his jaw set like stone. "You're in no condition. This is my stand." But her defiance mirrored a strength he had buried, an echo of the man he once was. The riders were nearly upon them, their silhouettes sharp against the faint moonlight. 3 men, led by the scar-eyed leader, their horses snorting as they reined in just beyond the rickety fence. The leader dismounted, his boots kicking up dust, a revolver glinting in his hand. "Last call, Gray," he roared, his voice slicing through the wind. "Hand her over, or we'll burn this hovel to the ground." His companions sneered, their guns drawn, the air thick with the stench of gunpowder and threat. Thomas stepped onto the porch, the rifle raised, his heart pounding with a fusion of dread and rage. The past surged forth, Jacob's lifeless form, the outlaw's laughter, igniting a fury he had suppressed for years. "You ain't taking her," he shouted, his drawl thick with defiance. The leader smirked, firing a shot that splintered the porch post, the crack reverberating like a war drum. Thomas ducked behind a rain barrel, returning fire, the rifle's kick jarring his shoulder. The bullet grazed the leader's arm, drawing a snarl as he staggered back. The other 2 charged, guns blazing, bullets thudding into the wood, kicking up dirt and shards. Thomas rolled, firing again, hitting one in the shoulder, the man collapsing with a cry. Inside, Sarah ignored the fire in her thigh, gripping the pistol with shaking hands. She dragged herself to the window, peering out as the second bandit advanced, his gun trained on Thomas. "No!" she cried, her voice raw, and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it distracted the man long enough for Thomas to take him down, a precise shot to the chest, dropping him into the dust. The leader, furious, drew a second revolver, firing wildly, a bullet grazing Thomas's side, blood seeping through his shirt. He grunted, dropping to one knee, but kept shooting, his aim steady. The leader stumbled, clutching his chest, then mounted his horse and fled, cursing into the darkness, leaving his fallen men behind. Thomas limped back inside, his side throbbing, blood staining the floorboards. Sarah rushed to him, her own wound reopening, blood trickling down her leg. "You're hurt," she gasped, her hands trembling as she tried to support him to the bench. "Easy. Please, it hurts," she murmured, her voice breaking. Thomas winced, easing himself beside her. "I'm almost done. Just gotta patch us up," he said, his tone soft despite the pain. He grabbed the whiskey and rags, tending to her thigh first, then his side, the alcohol burning as it cleansed the wounds. The cabin grew quiet, the fight's echoes fading, replaced by the soft hiss of the fire. They sat together, the lantern light dancing over their battered forms, a fragile peace settling in. Sarah's hand rested on his, a silent thank you, her trust in him deepening. Thomas felt the weight of his past lighten, replaced by a purpose he hadn't known in years. Outside, the wind carried the scent of blood and dust, a reminder that the leader would return. But for now, they had claimed a moment, a chance to heal. The oil beneath Sarah's land remained a secret, but the bond between them was becoming a treasure worth fighting for. If this showdown has you on edge, take a sip of your drink, lean back, and think about it. Would you have stood with Thomas or fought alongside Sarah? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if this story moved you, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The first rays of dawn spilled over Black Mesa, painting the sky in soft strokes of pink and gold, a gentle contrast to the blood-soaked yard where the fallen bandits lay still. The wind had calmed, leaving a heavy silence that wrapped around the cabin, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire within. Thomas sat on the porch, his side bandaged with a crude wrap, the sting of whiskey still sharp in the wound. His rifle leaned against the railing, its barrel cool now, a silent testament to the night's battle. Inside, Sarah rested on the bench, her thigh freshly bound, the fever broken at last, though her face remained pale, marked by the toll of survival. The air carried the scent of smoke and earth, a reminder of the violence that had forged their bond. Thomas rubbed his weathered hands together, the lines on his face deepening as he replayed the fight. The scar-eyed leader's escape gnawed at him. He knew the man would rally more men, perhaps even corrupt lawmen swayed by the oil's promise. But for now, the ranch stood quiet. The horses in the corral shifting restlessly, the desert stretching out like a vast, impartial witness. He limped inside, checking on Sarah, who stirred as he approached. "You're still here," she murmured, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion, her hand reaching for his. Thomas took it, his grip firm yet tender, the roughness of his palm against her skin a silent promise. "Ain't leavin'," he said, his voice low, warmed by a rare softness. "We made it." Sarah's tale unfolded as they sat by the fire, the flames casting a golden glow over their bruised forms. She spoke of her brother, Jed, a dreamer who had discovered oil but concealed it to protect their legacy, leaving only riddles in his journals. "They think I know where it is," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't. I just want the land back." Thomas listened, his own past surfacing, how he had failed to save Jacob, how oil had lured killers before. "Might be cursed," he muttered, but his eyes held a new resolve, a will to shield Sarah from that fate. "We'll find it together," he said, "or bury it deep." Her hand squeezed his, a pact sealed in their shared struggle, their trust blossoming into something stronger. Weeks passed. The leader returned with a posse, but Thomas and Sarah were prepared. With aid from a few townsfolk who rallied to her cause, they ambushed the attackers, turning the tide. The oil's location remained a mystery, but the land was secured, the gang's influence shattered in a swift trial. Sarah healed, her scars fading, her laughter returning as she worked alongside Thomas, mending fences and tending the herd. He rebuilt the barn, his hands steady for the first time in years, her presence a balm to his grief. Their hands brushed often, eyes meeting with a quiet understanding, love growing slow and steady like a desert bloom. The ranch pulsed with life again, where silence once ruled. The townsfolk still tell the tale, the wounded girl who crawled through the night, the old rancher who faced the storm. And each time, they end with a lesson. Sometimes the pain that nearly breaks us is the fire that forges us anew. Maybe that's true for you too. What wound have you carried that's shaped you into who you are today? If that thought sticks with you, this story's done its job. Before you go, let me speak from the heart. I'm truly grateful for every one of you who watches these tales, leaving kind words I cherish. I see some of you up late, past midnight even, and it worries me a bit. Please take care. These stories are meant to comfort, not steal your rest. If it's late where you are, say past 2 a.m. on this October 7th, 2025, close your eyes soon. The West will wait. I don't always reply, and I apologize. My years catch up, and editing these videos tires me more than I'd like. That's why I value my health now, and yours too. Thank you for keeping these Wild West stories alive. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight?